Well, hi, my name's David with Soaring High Woodworks. Today, we're going to be restoring the Stanley No. 3 plane, so stick around. Today, we are going to be restoring this Type 9 Stanley No. 3 smoothing plane. This was manufactured sometime between 1902 and 1907. Now, those who are familiar with hand planes might, or who are not familiar with hand planes, might ask, well, what exactly is a Type 9? What does that mean? So the term comes from what we call a type study. Now, there's plenty of videos and web pages out there with all the gory details, and I'll link some of those in the description. But in short, it's the way that we catalog hand planes and determine when a plane was actually manufactured. Stanley's been making metal hand planes since around 1869. And over the years, they made a number of design changes. They made improvements to add new features, sometimes to reduce the manufacturing costs. Sometimes they were trying to address some issue that had been discovered with the plane. So they didn't follow any sort of a type study. It's not like they had lined out ahead of time what they were going to do. But a number of years ago, a man by the name of Roger Smith carefully studied hundreds or probably thousands of planes to catalog their different characteristics. He also studied advertisements, catalogs, print media, all that kind of thing, in order to categorize them and group them together and determine when the different improvements were made over the years. And so he did that specifically on the number 4 planes. That's this right here. That's the most common plane that Stanley made. They produced millions of them over the years. And so the type study only covers number 4. Stanley made several other sizes going from number 1 all the way up to number 8. And so some of the other sizes don't follow the type study exactly. Sometimes there are some deviations. And again, because these were changes that were made as they went along, you'll find some differences, whereas especially when they were changing from one type to another, usually they would just use leftover parts and toss those in the mix as well. So what we can do is look at some of the different features that are on the plane. So things like the patent dates that are cast in the body. There was at one point 3 different patent dates cast on there. We can also look at the size of the adjustment knob here. That changed. The size of the knob, the front knob here, changed as well at one point. The logo on the lever cap, that was added. And then things like how the size was cast in the body, and then having Bailey cast in the body, that was a difference as well. So there's a variety of features that we can look at in order to determine when the plane was manufactured. So as you can see, I have a number of hand planes behind me, and these actually date anywhere from 1888. This was my oldest. This was manufactured in 1888, between 1888 and 1895. And they go all the way up to the 60s, which is when this one was made. I've got a couple that were made in World War II. That's these two specifically were made in World War II, and then some at different eras in between. And so I've restored all these planes, and along the way I've been learning about hand planes, and so I wanted to share that information with you and take you along on this journey as we restore this number 3. Now this one is actually what we call a Frankenplane. That means the parts don't all match the same type. They came from different eras. When I acquired this plane, the blade was missing, and the chip breaker along with the lever cap, all of those were missing. And so some of these parts actually came from a Type 7. The lever cap and the iron, or the chip breaker actually came from a Type 7. And the iron is actually from a Type 11, and you can tell by the trademark stamp that's in there. And then the lever cap looks almost the same as a Type 9, but the S that's cast in it does indicate that it's actually a different type. But as you can imagine, parts for a 120-year-old plane are getting hard to come by. And so they don't always match, and especially if you get one that doesn't have all the parts with it. But I did the best I could with this one, and the parts in this one are actually pretty close within the general 10 to 15 year era. So it's going to end up being a great little user, and I'm looking forward to having this one restored. This is a little small smoothing plane. Now, disclaimer, there's a variety of opinions about how far you should go when restoring a plane like this. Collectors generally like to have the patina, that's this black coloring that's on here, and that is just the way the metal oxidizes. So collectors like to have that patina on the plane, and they'll usually stabilize the rust, but they'll leave everything else. Some people will do a little more detailed restoration. They might leave the patina, but they'll restore the Japanning or refinish the knobs or something. So people do a variety of things. I like to do a full restoration. I like to get mine as close to factory as possible. And so that's what we're going to do here today. So if you're a collector and like to do something different, that's fine. We all have our own thoughts on that. But when we're finished with this, what we're going to do is we're going to clean up all of the rust. We're going to end up cleaning up all the metal. It's going to remove the patina, but it'll go back down to bare metal. It'll look brand new. We're going to refinish the Japanning, repaint, and redo that. We're going to restore the hardware, or the furniture rather. It's got spray paint and a few different things on it. And so we're going to clean that up and make that rosewood look as good as it can. And clean up all the brass, get it all nice and shiny. So by the time we're done, it'll look pretty close to the way it did when it came out of the factory 120 years ago. And so that's going to be exciting. So I want to bring you along on this journey with me. All right, well, let's start by taking this apart. Look at all our individual pieces. And I like to use a small cup to keep track of the small parts so they don't get lost. So as I mentioned, when I got this plane, it did not have a blade and chip breaker and lever cap. The guy I bought it from actually had 3 of these number 3 planes, and so I bought the whole lot for a single price. And so this one was the nicest of the bodies, and so I actually took the chip breaker and the lever cap off of another one, and this blade came from a different type, and there was a lot of pitting in the metal originally, and when it's pitted real bad, you can't sharpen it properly. But I had a professional guy who actually cut off the pitted section because it was only the first ½ inch or so. So he cut off that pitted section and then sharpened the blade for me, and got it up nice and razor sharp, better than I usually can do. And so I don't have to sharpen the blade. I will need to do some cleanup of that, but that is very sharp, so we'll cover it up so we don't cut ourselves. And then a chip breaker. I've already done a little bit of work on this, as you can see. And then that screw holds down your lever cap and the whole assembly. And then the frog has got a couple of screws in it as well. So pull those out. And then this adjustment knob is going to come off. And this is actually another way you can tell how old the plane is, because they used to spin the other way. When Stanley first made these planes, they were left-handed threads, I think it is. Or they were right-handed threads originally, and then they changed to left-handed around type 7, I think it is, just before this one actually. So you can tell which way it turns, so that's another thing. So there's our old frog. We'll get that cleaned up. And then Stanley used rosewood on for the knob and handle. They used rosewood up until around World War II, and because of the war and supplies, they weren't able to get rosewood, of course, during the war, and so they used hardwood. They went back to rosewood briefly for a time after that, but of course now rosewood is protected, and you're not able to import it or anything, and so and it's expensive as well now. So Stanley switched over to just regular hardwood, and they would paint them black, and that started around the 50s is when they started doing that. So that's another thing you can tell to age the plane. But this one's got some nice rosewood hardware. So we'll get all that cleaned up and it'll look nice. And then one thing that happens over the years is as this gets tightened, it compresses the wood, and it eventually gets to a point where you can't really get it tight. So a lot of people have to put washers underneath to kind of fill in that hole, and that takes care of it as well. Now this one is a little tight, so all right, so we're gonna have to put something to break that loose because that's rusted in there, but we'll get that done. There's the body. You can see the 2 patent dates that are cast in here, and those are one thing you can tell to indicate how old the plane is, because they were either 1, 2, or 3 patent dates at different times and different varieties. And then this frog base, that changed over the years, so that's something else you can look at. All right, so it's all taken apart. So let's get to restoring. All right, so this is one step that always makes me nervous, but it's popping out this pin that holds the yoke because that's going to be in the way when we're trying to clean this up. And we need to get this out to clean it up as well. So this frog is cast iron, which is brittle, so we have to be careful. But we use a nail punch and just gently tap out that pen. My memory card filled up in the middle of that, so here we go. But this did pop out finally. So there's the pin and the yoke, and so we're going to be set, and now we're ready to remove the threaded rod that is part of the adjustment. Now again, cast iron is brittle, so we have to be careful with this. We're going to hold it in the clamp just to keep it from spinning, but I don't want to tighten it down too much, just enough to keep it from moving. And again, we're going to put some of this ATF acetone mix on here to kind of help loosen it up a little bit. Now, some people will get a couple of extra knobs and put them on here and use that to break these loose. I don't have enough extra knobs to do that, but what I have found that works pretty well is to just wrap a piece of leather around it with my and use my channel locks. And since this is threaded backwards, it's not righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. Okay, so this was being really stubborn, and I couldn't get it off any other way. So what I've had to do, something I've seen online, I actually got my hacksaw, and I cut a notch into that, and then I filed it out to make it a little bit bigger. And then what we're going to do is try to use a screwdriver. I do have another stud off of that parts plane that I was telling you about, so I will put that stud in here so I don't have this messed up. Let's see. All right, there we go. Finally. Well, this has all turned out pretty well. We've got the body all shined up, repainted. The furniture turned out really nice. Got great color in it, and it's nice smooth coat of lacquer. Feels great in the hand. And then we've got all of the other stuff shined up and ready to go. So, first thing we're going to do, I already put this pin back in for the yoke. So we're going to put the threaded post back in. And just snug it up a little bit. So now we're going to get the yoke aligned in there, and that spins perfectly. We've got the brass on the knob. Forgot my 2 washers. And I always like to put the knob so that the grain runs parallel to the body. One of the changes that Stanley made is around the bottom of this, they actually cast a metal ring, and the knob went down inside the metal ring. And the reason they did that is because it's very common for these to chip off. As the plane is being used and the knob is pushed, it puts tension on the wood and it'll chip off in little pieces. And so one thing that helps avoid that is for the grain to run even with the body. If it's run crossways, it's more likely to split. That's the prevailing theory anyway. And then we've got our frog. And this body is, again, a type 9, which was just before the frog adjustment screw. So we have to get it adjusted manually. And what we want is for it to be even with the front edge there. So it's not catching. So we're sort of catching on this side. And these frog screws don't have to be really tight. They just need to hold it in place. Remember, I said this is already sharpened. Look at that edge. Anytime you put these together, you want to put it in sideways and then slide it around. That way you don't accidentally hit that edge. And then we're going to get it up really close. So you can just barely see a little bit of the blade. And we want to tighten this until we have a solid snap, but not so tight that it locks the blade in and you can't adjust it. And this is one of those things that just takes a little bit of practice getting used to. So now we should be able to turn this without too much trouble. There we go. The thing of beauty. But how does it cut? Let's see how this cuts now. We got to get our blade out a little bit first. This board is not flat, so I'm not getting a full shaving. Well, that's another plane finished and ready to go, and it turned out really well. Very happy with it, and it's a great addition to my collection. Even has a dedicated spot. So thank you very much for joining me on this, and this is YouTube, so do the thing. Like and subscribe and all that kind of stuff. And thanks again for joining me on this journey and restoring this plane.